In this video, we're going to go through example 4. We're going to create a function with the header m equals multiplication table of n. That will output an n plus 1 by n plus 1 multiplication table where the first row and first column go from 0 to n, and inside of the matrix is a multiplication table. So here's an example. N is equal to 5. So our first row goes from 0 to 5. Our first column also goes from 0 to 5. So we might start by filling in an array and then filling in first row, first column. And then each entry in the rest of the matrix, so in the rest of the matrix, so this area here, is a multiplication table. The way a multiplication table works is any one entry, let's say this 8, is the multiplication of 4 times 2. So they kind of line up, 2 times 4. Or this 12 here is 3 times 4. My hint is that you will likely need a loop, a for loop inside of a for loop for this one. So anytime I have a huge undertaking like this that I can't immediately figure out how exactly I want to do this, instead of heading to MATLAB, I head to my notebook and start writing some notes out. In my notes, I'm going to write out maybe an example. So let's say n is equal to 5. In that example, I've told you that m is going to be n plus 1 by n plus 1. So it's going to be 6 by 6. So even if I don't know how to do anything else yet, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to tackle this, why don't I just create an array of zeros that's n plus 1 by n plus 1. And then I can worry about filling it all in. So I'm going to say that m is zeros, or I'm just going to write it out, what it would look like. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we created an n plus 1 by n plus 1 array of zeros. So at least at this point, our output m1 has been defined. 2 is the correct size. So we're at least on the right path. The next thing I said, so that was kind of our step 1, we're going to pre-allocate m. Which basically just means fill m, or create an array. Pre-allocate means create an array that's the correct size and has the correct variable name, but isn't our final answer. So it's just kind of a holding matrix for now, where we're going to put our correct answer in. And then I said, so the first row goes from 0 to n. So the first row, how can I say the first row of m? I can say m, first row, all the columns. What do I want to put in the first row, all the columns? So what do I want to put in this row? Because that's what I've just selected here. What I want to put there is an array that goes from 0 to n with a step size of 1. Remember, our default step size is 0 to n. So, and also remember, everything that I'm doing here is pseudocode, so it's not necessarily MATLAB syntax, but it's helping us plan this out. So I'm going from 0 to n. So let's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, I'll fill in the 0, even though there's already a 0 there. I have also told us that the first column goes from 0 to n. First column, all the rows, so that's here. What do I want to put there? I want to put 0 to n. And it's possible MATLAB we might have to take 0 to n and do the transpose. I'm not quite sure. We'll have to try it out. But for now, just for our pseudocode, this is pretty good. So we pre-allocate m. Step 1, we fill in our first row. Step 2, we fill in our first column. Step 3. So now we've filled this in. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now we have a pretty good start, but we haven't used any loops yet, and I did tell you that not only will we use one loop, but it's possible we're going to have to use 2 loops. Before we get ahead of ourselves, why don't we just try to focus on filling in this row here. That's a little difficult to see. This row here. So right now it's just zeros, 0, 0, 0, 0. So in order to fill in that row, I need to know the indices of the row. And I could try to, no, scratch that. So I'm going to go step by step. So before I even focus on filling in the row, so first, when I look at this, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I'm going to fill in that matrix. Then I try to say, well, how about I just focus on the row? And now I'm going to say, not even the row. Let's just focus on the first entry of that row. What is that element? How would I say that location? So it's in the M array. It's in the second column. Or sorry, second row, second column. Not so bad. What do I want to put there? I want to put this number multiplied by this number. So this one, so I'm going to say equal is M. It's the first row, second column times M, second row, first column is that one right there. Okay, so I did that. I still don't know how to code it. That's okay. Why don't we go to our second entry now? And what I'm looking for here is a pattern. So something that's repeating that I can try to include in my loop. So this one, our index is M. It is the second row, third column. So I see a pattern, just a little pattern. Maybe I would have to do the next one, that this index here has increased by 1. So that's something that I'm kind of looking out for is, are there things that are increasing by 1? Okay, so I noticed that. And that one's going to be this number times this number. So I'm going to say is equal to, this number right here is M. It is the first row, third column, multiplied by M, second row, first column. Okay. So let's do one more before we try to look for our patterns. Because I also know what we're doing, so I think it's easier for me to spot a pattern. So let's do one more and then see if we can identify a pattern. So this next one is M, second row, fourth column is equal to this times this. So that's equal to M. So M, sorry about that. I keep knocking my keyboard. So M, first row, fourth column, multiplied by M, second row, first column. Okay, so now we're going to try to look for a pattern between these. So number one thing I see, this is the same as this and this. So those are all the same. Cool. Next thing I see, this is increasing by 1 each time. Not only that, it's also the same as this number here. Last thing I'm going to note before we start trying to kind of break this down is the pink numbers are always, always, always going to be 1. Because this is the first row, that is that one. This is the first column, that is that one. So those are always going to be 1. Okay. Anytime I see something increasing each step, I'm going to try to replace that with a variable. This is a column index. I tend to like to use J for my column index. So I'm going to say M 2, J is equal to this. M, first row always. J. So what I've underlined here and here, here and here, is what's increasing each loop. So it starts at 2, then 3, then 4. If we went here, it would have been 5. Here, it would have been 6. And that's multiplied by that yellow, this second term is always the same. And I know it might not be the same in the next row, but I'm not even worried about the rest of the matrix. I just want to start by getting this first row filled in. So M 2, 1. Okay. Next, what's J? What does J start with? What does J end with? So J started with 2, and then it might help to write our last one here. So that one right there is M, second row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 column is equal to M, first row, 6 column times M, second row, first column. So J starts at 2 and J ends at 6. Okay, that's all good. If my input n was always 5. But we already know that our input n is going to change. That's the whole point of the function, is that we can put different numbers in it. J is always going to start with 2 because our first column is always going to be 0 through n. So our second column is always going to be the column index of that. j is going to end at however many columns there are, at n plus 1 columns. So let's make this more general, n plus 1, which you'll remember for this example, n is 5, so we're going to end at the 6th column. So I don't know how to code the rest of it, so I'm going to head to MATLAB, see if I can code this part. And I do know how to code the rest of it. I'm just saying this, this is how I approach things when I don't know how to code them. I'm going to code what I do know how to do, see if it works, and then see if I can do more from there. Heading to MATLAB, I'm going to create a new script. I'm going to create a function. I think it was m equals multiplication table of n. I'm just going to copy and paste that, plug it right in. Looking back at my notes, step 1, we're going to pre-allocate m. So m is going to be filled with zeros, n plus 1 by n plus 1. We can use that awesome zeros function to do that for us. We could also use a for loop to do it for us, but let's do m is equal to zeros, n plus 1, comma, n plus 1. This is pre-allocating n plus 1 by n plus 1 array n. Fill with zeros. So that's what we're doing in that first line. I might even check it. So let's check it here. So q equals multiplication table of 7. Let me choose a smaller number so we can actually see it. So it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows. Perfect. We are on our way. Next, I said we're going to fill in the first row. We're going to fill in the first row, which is the first row, all the columns, with the array 0 to n. So if n equals 5, I'd like to try things out in my command window, and I type in 0 to n. That's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say m, first row, all the columns, equals 0 to n. First row, all the columns. Fill in first row with 0 through n. Let's save, go back to our command window to run this thing. Perfect, we have our first row, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Next, we're gonna fill in our first column. I had put this here, I said that I'm not sure if that's gonna work. We might have to do a transpose, but I don't know, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So m, all the rows, first column equals 0 through n. So fill in first column with 0 through n. Like I said, I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it out, see if it does. And it does. Great. I believe you could have also taken the transpose of that. That might have to be like that. Yeah, but because we know the size of this, we don't necessarily need to fill in the transpose. And that's all related to the fact that we pre-allocated this. Okay, so we are off to a good start. Now I wanted to, next step, so this is a repetitive thing. We know exactly how many times we're going to do it. We're going to do it, in this case, 5 times. where j starts with 2. We start at the second column and we go all the way to the n plus 1 column. That's a for loop. So when we're repeating something and we know how many times we do it, that's a for loop. So for j equals 2 to n plus 1. Now in our for loop, we want to fill in, we're just doing the second row right now and cycling through the columns. I did tell you that we're going to need a for loop inside of another for loop, so maybe that other for loop is going to help us go through the rows, but that's a problem for a few minutes from now. M of second row, j column, so we're going to go through the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth column, equals m first row, j column, 1, 2, 3, 4, or sorry, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth column times 1, which is m2, 1. So heading back to MATLAB, we have m. This is going on our second row. The column is j. So we're cycling through the columns to fill in the row. So we're going to take what's in the first row in that same exact column, same column, times what's in the same row, first column. Let's see if it worked. CLC. Great. So we have our first row. So now is the tricky part. We got it working for one row. Now we have to figure out how can we generalize what we just did to work for the next row, and work for the next row, and work for the next row. So before I even start trying to code, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but before I start trying to code, I am going to come over here and write it out and see if I can once again find a pattern. So we are moving on. We are no longer on our second row. We filled that in with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've moved on to the next row. And let's look at the second column of that one. And let's write down what we're going to put in there. So in that, we are in the third row, second column. What we're going to put is what's here times what's here. So that is M first row, second column. And then we're going to put whatever is here. So times M third row, first column. Okay. I'm going to choose just another random spot in that row. Or we could, let's just go to the next spot. So that one's going to be M. We're now still in the third row, now in the third column, equals M first row, third column, times M third row, first column. Moving on to the next one. Oh, I did not mean to erase my 0. Moving on to this one. This is M third row, fourth column is equal to this M first row, fourth column times M third row, first column. So you'll remember that right now, let's generalize this one just like we did the other one. So this is m. We have these values that are increasing each time. We have these values that are always 1. And then we have all these values that are, looks like they're all 3. Interesting. So I'm going to leave that as a 3. And I use j is equal to m1 comma j times m3 comma 1. I'm going to compare that to the code that I wrote for the previous one and see if we see a pattern. So that was for the second row. This is for the third row. So this is the second row. This is the third row. You can work through this on your own if you don't believe me, but the fourth row is going to be m4 comma j. So fourth row, jth column, m1 comma j times m4 comma 1. Two, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. So what it looks like is we can go to the second row, and we're going to fill in first the second row, second column. Then we're going to fill in the second row, third column. Then we're going to fill in the second row, fourth column. Second row, fifth column. Second row, sixth column. Now I'm regretting choosing such a large number. Anyway, then we're going to go to our third row, and we're going to start over. We're going to fill in the third row, second column. Third row, third column. Third row, fourth column. Third row, fifth column. And third row, sixth column. Then we're going to go to the next row. We're going to go to that fourth row. And we're going to fill in the fourth row, second column. We're going to fill in the fourth row, third column. Fourth row, fourth column. Fourth row, fifth column. And then sixth column. And we're going to do this again for the fifth row and the sixth row. Where we fifth row and the sixth row. So we have already coded this part. That is our, for j equals, this is our, let's see, for j equals 2 to n plus 1. That is that loop. It's there, it's there, it's there, it's there, and it's there. And we're repeating it again and again and again. So this is a loop inside of a loop. So we're going to have for I equals, we start at 2, we go to 6, but more generally n plus 1. And that's going to be outside of this. So let's first code that, and then we'll look at how we need to change our line of code to fit that outer loop. For I equals 1 to 2 to n plus 1, end. So I made sure that this, my outer loop is all the way around my inner loop. And if I do that Control A, Control I, then it indents this bit here. Okay, so right now I'm only doing the second row, but I want to do the second. So this goes 2, 3, 4, 5 to n plus 1 to cycle through the rows, whereas this one is cycling through the columns. Oh man, I was trying to put that comment up here. So I don't want to just do the second row. I want to do the ith row, which is going to start with the second row, then the third row, then the fourth row, and I here. So again, we're going to start with 2. We're going to completely finish the j loop. So while I is 2, j is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end. I is now 3, j is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end, end. I is now 4, j is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end, end, and so on. So exactly how we just wrote it out here. So I is 2, these are our j values. I is 3, these are our j values. I is 4, j values. I is 5, j values. I is 6, j values. So we just spent a lot of time to write not that much code, but it's very complicated code. So you'll notice that so much more time went into planning and working out the example as opposed to the actual coding part. And I think that's very common, especially when we first start learning how to code. That's our multiplication table. So it works for 4. Let's make sure it works for a larger number. And before we do that, I'm going to make sure that my command window is nice and big. Let's try 8. Awesome. So this one's 8 times 8. This is 4 times 8. This one is 3 times 5, and so on. So that was an example of a for loop inside of a for loop. It's when we do one repetitive thing, and then we want to do that one repetitive thing again and again and again. So we cycled through all the columns for the second row. Then we wanted to start back at the beginning and cycle through all the columns for the next row. Then we wanted to start back at the beginning and cycle through all the columns of that row, and so on, and so on, and so on. So whenever you have something that repeats, and then that repeating action happens again and again and again, that's when you need a for loop inside of a for loop, or sometimes a while loop inside of a while loop. But it's when you need a loop inside of a loop is when you have a repeating thing that is also repeating.